Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, How Much Are You Worth? A Look into Digital Identity and Ownership. I'm Lou Kerner, CEO of BIGtoken, and I'm excited to have with us two great panelists and my co-host for the show, Gilbert Hill. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Gilbert. Gilbert?
Thanks, Lou. Hi, everyone. My name's Gilbert. I'm co-host, sort of guest host with Lou of this event. I'm really pleased to welcome, well, first of all, to usher in the discussion around digital identity and ownership. Wow, what a huge topic. And I think depending on where you come from, everyone's got a different take, and often sort of violently almost opposing in some spaces. It's one of those most divisive elements in sort of discussions in LinkedIn. But I think what's interesting here is that we've got panelists from different parts of the world, different approaches, both to preserving privacy, establishing sovereign identity, and also trying to build a new kind of data commerce. So I'm really looking forward to it. A bit of background into BIGtoken and Lou and myself. Hopefully yours. Lou is the CEO of BIGtoken, and I'll leave you to introduce yourself in just a sec, Lou. My name's Gilbert Hill. I'm a privacy technologist, which a couple of years ago wasn't a thing, but now seems to be quite popular. I was CEO of a blockchain company helping people take back control of their data rights, and I'm a privacy sort of tech entrepreneur, and I'm very interested in these matters. So that's me. Lou, did you want to jump in with intros, and then I'll let our guests intro themselves?
Sure. As I said before, Lou Kerner, CEO of BIGtoken, and we have 9 million verified users who have downloaded our app, and we take their data, anonymize it, sell it to brand advertisers, and share that revenue with our users. We believe data privacy is a human right, and we're excited to host these webinars where we're able to get some of the world's experts on privacy. So thanks, Gilbert.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lou. And so on to, I think what unites us all is the belief that data privacy is a human right. And as I mentioned before, we're all approaching that from different directions. And I think there are different, there are different tracks. There's a regulatory track, there's a consumer insights and the consumer beliefs, which can, as we know, can change very rapidly. And then finally, there's the pace of technology, which it's a full-time job keeping on top of. So this is going to be one of a series of webinars where we'll look at different elements of that. Today, we're going to be looking at how people can make money. There's been a lot of talk about universal basic income, and now increasingly a universal data income. So I'm really excited to welcome Enoch who's a CEO of the Data Dividend Project, or also known as sort of the Yang Gang. So it'd be great to give us a little bit of an intro about yourself, Enoch.
Sure, thank you, Gilbert. And I apologize that I don't have video. I was having some Zoom problems from Vancouver. So the Data Dividend Project, as you mentioned, was inspired by Andrew Yang's ideas that he was espoused from the debate stage during the Democratic presidential election in 2020, and was launched in cooperation with Andrew Yang and Humanity Forward in June of 2020. I am the CEO of the Data Dividend Project, and our mission is to create a movement around data rights and universal data income.
Fantastic. And I also wanted to welcome Avishai, who is a dual qualified lawyer and a fully qualified privacy expert based in Tel Aviv and working for Privacy Team. Would you like to add something to that, Avi?
Sure. Thank you very much, Gilbert, and thank you to BIGtoken, to Lou, and to everyone for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. So as Gilbert said, I'm based in Tel Aviv. I was up until a couple of months ago for about a decade, a lawyer in law firms dealing with data privacy issues, both in Israeli firms and in UK firms. Most recently headed the privacy practice for a UK firm that was based here in Israel. And a couple of months ago, I took off my lawyer hat and put on my consultant hat with a view to being a little bit more kind of getting into the weeds and into the companies advising on global privacy compliance. I'm also a big fan of what BIGtoken is doing, and just generally I enjoy speaking and writing about these topics of kind of the future of what looking into the future and seeing what will be done, what has been done, what will be done, and how it will be done with our data. So very excited to be here and hear everyone's thoughts, share some thoughts of my own, and look forward to a great conversation.
Absolutely, and also hopefully we're hoping to get some great questions from the audience. So welcome to the audience, and thanks for sharing this time with us. So I guess to open it up,
and just for a minute,
yeah.
Gilbert, with regards to the questions, if you have a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. And so put your question there. And if we're going to take your question, we will actually make you a panelist. You can ask the question yourself and have a bit of a dialogue back and forth.
Absolutely. So we look forward to that. This is your platform to grill us and for us to work out what the direction of travel is. And I think, you know, just to set the scene, I think as someone who's been involved in I put my hand up. I think I got into privacy around 6 years ago by mistake. I was running a London web agency, and we were doing a lot of work with web cookies on behalf of clients in the kind of ad tech space. I fell down this kind of rabbit hole, and I think for a lot of people, web cookies were the entry into this balance between what we get, services that we're used to and we appreciate for free on the web, and the price, which is our personal data. And I think it's been interesting to see the privacy tech space, and as BIGtoken represents the privacy, the data commerce, consumer data commerce space, start to grow from a real cottage industry to something which is becoming really huge. But I think there's still at various points in that journey, there were times a bit like when I'm taking my children in the car, when I said, are we there yet? And it would be, as a sort of first question, it would be good to know from the guests, where you think we are at the moment in this journey. There's obviously, I've talked about the regulatory, regulations picking up space. We now have consumer grade tech, which we can come on to in a moment in terms of alternatives to some of the existing platforms. But how far down the line are we? Why don't I start with you, Avishai?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I love the question, by the way, of the example of the kids in the car, because we are kind of nagging and trying to figure out kind of what, are we there yet? Have we gotten there? And I think that we are right at the beginning. And I think we're just on the cusp, and there's no clear evidence to that, to the fact that this is where we are, then the fact that we're having this discussion now, right? So we're having this discussion where we're thinking about these issues. We know that the technology exists. It's really in its infancy, but it does exist. And I think that it's really, really great that the questions around the ethics of it, and you mentioned this in the beginning of the talk, the questions around people have different views on these points about whether and to what extent people can monetize their data, how it should be used, what it should be used for, what people should and shouldn't be able to sell their data for. And those conversations, I'm really, really pleased that those conversations are happening now at the beginning, kind of before we really gotten into the system, and before things are actually taking off and kind of exploding. I'm really happy that these conversations are happening now, because I think that oftentimes what you find with these questions of that have both technological and potentially ethical questions is that you get so far down the line, and only then do you turn around and say, oh, hold on a second, are we sure that this is where we want to be? And so I think that it's great that these conversations are happening now in what I feel really is the infancy of this revolution.
I think that's a really good point, that it does feel like we are moving out of a kind of compliance zone into the area where, you know, as technologists, as privacy professionals, as business people, we can start to actually, you know, bake the correct use of data and more equitable, you know, share of its benefits, both, you know, in terms of cool things and also in terms of hard cash, into the products that we design and build, rather than constantly trying to sort of lean out of the window. I'm laboring this car analogy now, but leaning out of a window to try and keep the hubcaps on, you know. So I think that's, you know, I think we are getting there, and I think it's an exciting time. And I think, you know, the projects, you know, like the Data Dividend Project, reflect that. We weren't having these conversations a couple of years ago. So having said that, Enoch, where do you think we are in this kind of mission?
Yeah, I think that we're 2 years into a 10-year journey. Okay. So I think we're still in the first 20% of the journey. And the reason I say that is because GDPR in Europe, I think, went into effect in 2018. And the California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect in July of 2020. And so, Gilbert, when you mentioned the 3 areas, regulation and policy, technology, and consumer awareness, I think with respect to regulation and policy, we're two or 3 years into a decade-long journey. With respect to consumer awareness and education, I think that you're starting to see consumers becoming more and more aware of the abuse of their data and their data privacy. For example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal in the United States really raised consumer awareness starting in around 2018. And now you're seeing things like, you know, the movie The Social Network on Netflix, which I think is really raising grassroots awareness around what's been happening in the tech industry. And so that's why I say I think we're 2 or 3 years into a 10-year journey. And then on the tech side, I think a lot of exciting stuff is starting to happen with companies like BIGtoken, with new uses for blockchain, et cetera. So with respect to those 3 legs, I think we're still at the beginning, but I think, you know, the signs are all trending towards giving consumers more control over their data and eventually compensating them if they should choose to share it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what role? I mean, this is sort of geographically specific, but you know, there's a different approach in the US to other parts of the world. What role do you see the state playing in that, Enoch? Do you think it's something that you know, the state just provides a framework, or is there going to be an active push?
When you say state, Gilbert, are you referring to?
I'm thinking almost like the politicization of the kind of movement, because I think there's a lot of impetus that's been carried along with, you know, Andrew Yang in particular. I think in Europe it's been from a different point. You know, you've got Max Schrems, you've got sort of data activists. Do you think that if this will, you know, a data dividend or people making money from a data dividend will ever be a vote winner?
I see what you're saying. So I think when you referenced the state, I was a little bit confused whether you meant the government or a particular state. I would say that, you know, governors like Governor Newsom in California, he talked about data dividends in his state of California address, I think 2 years ago. And Governor Cuomo in New York State has been talking about data privacy and data dividends as recently as his State of New York address in early 2021. So I think that government regulators, with respect to the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, now looking at antitrust and breaking up Facebook, Google, Twitter, Apple, with discussions about revising Section 230. I mean, I think that the state generically, meaning the government, whether it's the federal government or state government, definitely has a role to play. And you're seeing them driving change, even though I will say that generally federal government and state governments are usually behind the curve. It usually requires consumer awareness and education and demand and awareness of what's happening before the government and the regulators will step in. And that's what I think you see happening in the United States, right? You had the Cambridge Analytica scandal that led to a spotlight on big tech. And now you're seeing a number of laws and regulations being passed or being debated and being considered to be passed. In California, the California Privacy Rights Act was actually a ballot referendum. So it didn't come from the state legislature. It actually came from a private individual, Alastair McTaggart, who funded the Prop 24 to go onto the ballot, and Californians voted overwhelmingly for it in November of 2020.
Absolutely. So it's people power in that respect. And we've got a great question already in the Q&A, which I want to come on to in just a sec. But before we do, Lou, I wanted to get your input as our host in terms of where you think we are in this. Enoch's talking about 2 years into a 10-year journey. Where do you think we are, and where's BIGtoken positioning itself on this kind of journey?
Sure. So I think we're very early. What's super interesting to me is that this is being driven by regulators and not so much by people. And while my guess is most of the people on this call are major advocates and think data privacy is super important. In fact, most people in the US and around the world, while they might say, if they're asked in a survey that they think it's very important, if you ask them to spend $1 or a few minutes, most won't do that. And so, what we found at BIGtoken is that rather than offering privacy, as the main reason for being a part of BIGtoken, we're about helping users. Our mission is to help users own and monetize their data. And they can have whatever privacy they want by using our tools. And my guess is, over time, people, broadly will become more aware of how important data privacy is. But initially, as I said, it's being driven by the regulators, and we're trying to entice them in with money.
Yeah, which I think is the missing element. It's a kind of rocket fuel in all of this. And I think that takes us on to our first question, which is a great one, which is from Mark McElwain, which is there an estimated value per person that Google, Facebook, etc. collect for free on an individual user annually? Now that's the sort of $1 million question, or much more than $1 million. I think Mark Zuckerberg famously said that each user was worth $1 per year, but obviously that was from a position of controlling the visibility of that value. I actually had a conversation with a VC a couple of days ago where we did a quick calculation using published revenue figures for Facebook, which is one of those platforms, per users, and the figure that sort of we came up with, and this is kind of highballing, it was like around $3,000 per year. Now that there's all the difference, and we can come back to exactly how we boil that down. But I guess my point is that that's a big scale between one end and the other. And bear in mind that the biggest markets for Facebook in particular are Asia, Africa, and South America, where the idea of money from your data, a second income from data, can make a real impact to people's lives and opportunities. So things that seem inconsequential to us in mature markets are make a real difference. And so I think the challenge in data price discovery, like I said, is this sort of a lack of general visibility. And I think there's Lou mentioned in the run-up to this that there's a Pew survey which shows that there's concern among consumers around their data, but there's also this desire to be cut into the deal, cut into the action. And there was a study last year by the Tech Policy Institute, which was across 6 different countries. And that showed that people do have a natural point at which they're prepared to sell access to their data. And obviously it was from quite a small sample, but in the case of Facebook, it settled, around $3.50 per month. And of course, Facebook currently doesn't sell data to advertisers directly, but instead targets users on advertisers' behalf. So, at the moment, there's a lot of control and trust centralized in, those platforms like Facebook to avoid that kind of price slippage. So, and I think, a lot of what we're starting to see around consumer awareness, I think what the WhatsApp exodus showed us earlier this year is that something that Dame Wendy Hall, who's a leading AI and sort of tech academic in the UK, described as everyone becoming prosumers, that we don't just consume, but we also produce data. And also a lot of the things that we've currently, in the past we've acceded to, like cookie banners and terms and conditions, that we're starting to say, I know I clicked on those terms in the past, but I want a new deal. So again, just like we're moving beyond compliance, I got into privacy via cookie banners. They're not cutting it anymore. So what do we think, how are we, what does the panel think we can do to shine light on this and create a kind of functioning market for data? I'll start with first of all, Mark, did I encapsulate your question, or is there more that you want to add?
No, I think it's a great answer, and I appreciate it. It's kind of one of those things that I've always wondered. It started off with there was a situation where I was talking about a certain vacation spot, and literally within the next 5 minutes, I was shown an ad for that vacation spot. And so, obviously in the Facebook, Google, Alexa ecosystem, what have you, they're selling this stuff almost in real time and obviously making money off your information. So just very curious what the annual estimated income per person.
Sure. Well, I think just real quick, and then I'll let the panelists answer your question, Gilbert. And that's, if you just take a look at the revenue, these are kind of round figures for 2021, but Facebook will do about 100 billion in revenue, and they have about 2.8 billion users. So they're generating about $35, $36 per user. Now, a lot of those, as Gilbert said, are outside the US and Africa, or Asian countries, emerging countries. So if you take a look at the US, in Facebook, actually, it breaks out users and revenue there. They generate about $60 per US user. Google has a much bigger user base. They're about 200 billion users 200 billion revenue, 4 billion users, $50 revenue per user. But again, that's a global figure. My guess is that, it's closer to $100 per user in the US.
Do you mind if I hop in here?
Please do.
Guys? Yeah, so this is Enoch, and Mark, I think your question is a very good one. You can back out those numbers based on the 10K reports that are submitted by Facebook, Google, Twitter, et cetera. But I think that there's kind of 3 other ways to answer your question as to what the data is worth. One way is by looking at economists who are studying the issue. Glenn Weil and Jaron Lanier have published research where their calculations are that even in today's economy, users in North America could make $500 to $1,000 a year sharing their data. And when artificial intelligence becomes 10% of the economy, then Weil and Lanier calculate that it could be up to $20,000 annually for an average American family of 4 people. So that's one way of kind of looking at it. the second way is I think you can kind of look at the rough numbers by backing it out from class action settlements. So there's a lot of class actions that are filed by lawyers when data breaches happen. So the most prominent example is Facebook was scanning your facial features without your consent. And Illinois has a biometric privacy law. And Facebook was sued, and they settled the case for $650 million only for Illinois residents. And it turned out to be about $350 per user who made a claim to that settlement in Illinois. So, you know, you could kind of say, okay, well, roughly based on that settlement, my facial biometrics just for Facebook was worth $350. And then the third way is, I think, what companies are willing to pay to advertise to you. And Mark, you gave it a good example of, you know, talking about a vacation and then getting an ad for some vacation spot. You know, a vacation is a big ticket spend, but could you imagine if, like, you were looking to buy a car or looking to buy a house? What would advertisers be willing to pay to advertise to you if they knew that you were in the market for a new car or if you were in the market for a new house? I think, you know, those are all alternative ways to measure kind of what your data is worth above and beyond what the companies are actually publicly disclosing. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Gilbert.
Well, I just want to add something, Gilbert, if I may, which is I mean, obviously a fascinating discussion, and I think it's great. But just to pick up on one element that I think actually one of our listeners, one of the viewers, William Scruggs, put in the chat. He said, does revenue vary depending on where users are located? Will this affect the monetary value that users are worth? And I think that one of the things that we need to remember is whenever you're talking about something as kind of immaterial, not in the sense that it's not a physical asset, it'll by definition depend on the supply and demand, right? And we see it very clearly with cryptocurrency. Right. I heard a podcast yesterday where Michelle Dennedy, who's known as the privacy ninja, everyone in the privacy world, she's a very famous woman in the privacy world, it was saying that there was you know, when Bitcoin just started, she was there was, you could buy a cup of coffee for 6 Bitcoin. I think everyone who's listening to the session today would kill for 6 Bitcoin today. That's like that's an amazing amount of money. So just to remember that these things fluctuate, and it's very possible that what the data is worth today is not necessarily what it's going to be worth tomorrow. Where the user is located may have an impact. It could be that they're located in a country where the government decided that the parliament decided that they're going to enact a law that's not going to allow for a data dividend. They don't want people to sell their data. I wouldn't necessarily think that that's something certainly that's feasible in under European data laws. I can definitely see a France or a Germany potentially enacting a law that says you cannot sell people's data because it's seen as a basic human right in the EU. And so so that will obviously depend the location and also the type of data you're selling, right? You may have users that choose to, whether it's more sensitive data, you may think about potentially for a company, wanting to collect health data to sell you medical devices that may be worth more. And so I think to think of it as one number for all Facebook users might be a little bit, not taking into account the variance in which I think probably this will end up playing out, in my opinion.
I think that's an excellent point. William, did that answer your question, or is there anything else you'd like to add right now? No problem. What I'd say is that I think.
You unmute, William, if you want to say anything.
Oh, please, yeah.
Going once, going twice. Okay.
Okay, I think that, you know, as we've shown, the answer as the value, a bit like privacy, is highly contextual, and it kind of depends. And in many cases, we don't necessarily, and I actually think that advertisers don't necessarily have the full view of the provenance of the data that they'd like. And this is also a kind of limiting factor to some of the, you know, the decentralized marketplaces that have sprung up. I just want to share on this a couple of graphics which caught my my eye. The first one being is hopefully you're seeing this similar service is different data. Hang on, I'm just going to share that now. What, you know, obviously I mentioned the kind of a WhatsApp exodus. For those of us who want a bit of info, actually I can, you know, I can describe this by a conversation I had with my my father-in-law, who he's a baby boomer, and with the advent of COVID, he moved all his kind of socializing from a pub to WhatsApp, until within the space of about 36 hours, all his friends started saying, I'm now moving to Signal because of my concerns around privacy. Which was amazing. And I think, you know, a lot of also a lot of a recent crop of PrivTech startups in the US and Israel have sort of focused on kind of deleting your data from company records and, you know, mailing lists, or creating like burner accounts. Now, you know, actually, and this is borne out by my experience at Tap My Data, we learn that people don't want to delete the digital services they use. And actually, I think we've seen quite a lot of people sneakily go back onto WhatsApp, but they, you know, we're all too busy to sort of play at being spies, but they do want to know that their data is safe and private, and they're treated respectfully as data customers, even if they haven't bought anything yet. And I think, you know, in that context, when they're offered a similar sort of consumer grade service with different data footprint, they take notice and they start to vote with their feet. So this is a graphic from a Forbes article which looked at messaging, where we're starting to see, you know, fully functional equivalents to the more sort of data hungry services we've all used. You see on one end of us on the spectrum, you've got Signal, which collects very little. With Facebook, you are collecting a lot more, and that's because of obviously their business model, which is explicitly around sort of centralizing and monetizing that data. The other thing which really I have to say, this is sort of my hobby, I never get sick of you know, updating the Lumascape, which, as we all know, is the kind of the landscape of intermediaries between advertisers and the eyeballs of us, the consumers. And we can see that why we have been, you know, we may be 2 years into this kind of journey to change things and build a kind of new data economy, the data engine of commerce is roaring ahead. So actually this doubled it 50% from 2020. So there's you know, I think one of the you know, if we're going to make money from our data, you know, one of the conditions is control, that people are wanting to have control. And as Lou says, you know, we'll reach that point where we're cool with, you know, sharing our data, and our privacy becomes superseded by what's being offered. And it may be something that we're used to, maybe a service, or it may be crypto, and there are opportunities. But you know, consumers are moving to a situation where they want to have control, and also to have, you know, one of those preconditions is kind of free movement of data. And I just wanted to sort of ask you, Lou, how specifically you see, you know, BIGtoken coming in to help move advertisers and also consumers to this new paradigm.
Sure. Well, Gilbert, as you know, you know, we're focusing longer term on, you know, getting all the data that we have on our users and putting it on the blockchain, and giving them the tools that they then can decide, you know, how much privacy they want and how much monetization they want to engage in. So again, it comes back to, you know, our belief that they should own the data, and then they can decide what to do with that data that they own.
Exactly. And I think on that point, there is a lot of there's a lot of encouraging developments, particularly in the US. And Enoch, I saw that late last year that the Californian federal court ruled that consumers have property rights to their online personal info, and that was as a result, as I understand it, of pressure from the Data Dividend Project.
Yes, I wouldn't say it was as a result of pressure from DDP, but basically what happened was there have been a number of data privacy case class actions that have been filed against Google and Facebook in the Northern District of California, which is where they're based, right? San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And in a number of those cases, Google and Facebook have argued that there are no property rights in online data, right? And so the plaintiffs' counsel have argued back and said, well, actually, there are property rights in data, and the Data Dividend Project and Andrew Yang submitted a friend of the court brief supporting that argument. So I think we had a role to play. We weren't directly responsible. The court has ruled, at least in the first Google case, that the current trend in the United States is for users to have personal property rights in their online data, which is, a great ruling. And Google actually moved for reconsideration, and the court denied that. So that is the law of the land, at least in the Northern District of California for now. And I have no doubt that Google and Facebook will, of course, appeal, which is why I also said that, we're about 2 years into a 10-year journey, because, it's going to go from the district court to the Ninth Circuit, potentially up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, and I think, but I think it's an important moment to see that the in the public perception, as well as it's starting to see in the courts that personal data is being viewed as my property, rather than that sort of age-old thing. If you're getting something for free, you are the product. And I think so. If we think about ownership as one element, and also collective agency. I think one thing that I believe in, at Tap My Data, we found that the average user had around 130 records kept on them by different companies. We also wanted to use blockchain because one of the problems was that companies were all kind of marking their own homework, that they that they were complying by the letter of the law and that rights were being respected. So we use a blockchain as a sort of public statement of record. I think what BIGtoken, Tap, and others are starting to explore now is to move to a situation where you can actually realize that value from the data. But to do that, I think there are two key things which are starting to come to pass now. The first one being free movement of data, or what my friend Shiv Malik in the UK says is, data-free trade. And the second being collective agency, because as an individual, I'm time poor, and also my voice isn't very loud, though my children probably disagree with that. But but together we're stronger. And so in Europe recently, we've had the Digital Markets Act, which I think a bit like the Californian example is an example of a new sort of breed of regulation, which gets more granular and is more about the role of individuals, of consumers or citizens or whatever we want to call them. One of these has, it addresses both of these conditions. The first being that it requires gatekeeper platforms, the big guys we've been talking about, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn as well, to provide full APIs to their data. Now, the benefit of this is it's going to reduce the friction that is out there in getting your data currently, and it also starts to create consistency. We need shared protocols, data protocols, and taxonomy, so that the quality of what you receive and can then choose to share, own, or sell is fit for purpose. Is up to the level that it can be used by data buyers. And I think that's where sort of ID starts to get into place. The final, element in the Digital Markets Act is that it brings to the fore the notion of data unions, which is, I think, a really neat way to get people who are less engaged in all of this debate than us to participate. So it's a structure whereby you can join together, or it can be an existing social structure like your church or a club or a group, where you can have your data rights and views represented, and that group can benefit from an income, which gives advertisers as well, consumer insights at scale. So that's what's happening from a European point of view. Obviously, Avishai, we've spoken in the past about the situation in Israel, and I think there are what really struck me was two elements. Firstly, that 80%, Israel is a tech powerhouse, but 80% of that is for export, and the second one being that in Israel, security always trumps privacy. That people don't care about privacy so much as long as the data isn't going in the hands of Israel's enemies. So, what role do you think Israel, it has one of the PrivTech unicorns, what playing in all of this sort of convergence?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I just want to, before I answer your question, I just want to add one thing to what you said before, which is that I completely agree with you that privacy laws are about giving the control back to the people, and all of the examples that you talked about were about giving control. But I think there's another crucial ingredient that needs to go into that recipe. It's about control, but it's also about trust. And I think that what a part of it is giving back control, but the other element is about ensuring that when people give their data, they trust the company. And if you look at legislation like GDPR like legislation, whether you're talking about CCPA, you're talking about LGPD in Brazil, or the other legislation that's popping up now around the world, it talks about things that have never been talked about in regulations before, like accountability and being being reasonableness, things where you say, well, this isn't a regulation, how am I supposed to know what reasonable is? And it's about saying, people need to be able to trust the organizations that they give the data to. So I think it's definitely returning the control to the people, but also allowing them to have trust. And that I think feeds in nicely to what you were asking about, and you described perfectly. So Israel is an interesting country in the sense that we have an adequacy decision from the EU, which means that the European Union has recognized that Israel has a level of data protection and of privacy legislation that is commensurate with that of the GDPR that was granted in 2011. And at the same time, Israel's privacy law is from 1981. Let's just all take a second here and think about what technology looked like back in 1981 and what privacy issues were back in 1981, right? So you have this kind of so on the one hand, you have recognition that Israel's privacy laws are, somewhat adequate, but they might only be on paper and they might be quite antiquated. And I think that the reason, and as you said correctly, Gilbert, in Israel, security will always trump privacy. It's very much that people, if you go out into the street and ask an Israeli citizen, what are you most concerned about? They'll say to you, probably, I'm worried that the Iranians will get hold of my data, right? That's the concern. It's not about, I want companies to treat my information with respect and to, what we're talking about here. I want to earn, dividends from my data, and I want to be able to make sure that companies don't exploit my data and use it for other purposes. They're not so concerned about that on the street. They're concerned about other things. So that's in terms of kind of the average Israeli. And just one more point, and then I'll hand it back to you, which is that, as you said, Israel is a tech powerhouse known as the Startup Nation. We have, I think, the most high-tech startups per capita, if not second to Silicon Valley for sure. But the interesting thing about Israel is that the market is so small. We're only a country of 9 million people, that everything is made for either the European market or the US market or both. And so when you think about tech solutions that feed, that you need to feed them data in order for them to work, right? All of these AI platforms and, technology platforms that need data in order to get better, inherently what happens is you'll be more concerned, a company in Israel will be more concerned about complying with CCPA, GDPR, and the regulations overseas rather than the regulations here in Israel. So you have this very interesting interplay, and there's always tension, but that's kind of how we live our life here in the Middle East. There's always tension.
I think that's a great point, and I'm aware there's some questions that I really want to address.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying, if I understand right, is that there is companies and like tech providers like Israel are building pan-regional, pan-global tech solutions, and we need to have a sort of a suite of tools for people which are as easy to use and give us the same functionality as the platforms we've all got used to, and that focus on utility and self-interest enough to scale globally. And privacy there, so you're not doing this because privacy, but privacy is a feature that's baked in. And I think when you turn that on its head, it starts to become a lot more interesting. And one of the questions is from Bennett, which is about digital wallets. And I think, we've talked about getting your data back and, free trade in data, but digital wallets are something which has, failed to get traction in the past. But I think is going to be a key element, one of the key tools in this. I think both it solves a number of problems, but it stops me having that situation that one of the audience was saying, where I'm constantly doing stuff in the rearview mirror. I'm getting ads for things that I was interested in weeks ago, but I can start to have my data and start to control the consent and access around it. Just quickly, do we think, do we think that is something which I'm bundling in another question here, which one of the big existing platforms can provide, or does it need to be a ground up startup? So Bitcoin, digi wallets, so we can hold our data and make money from it. What do we think about that? I'll let you jump in, Enoch.
I think it's a great idea. That if you were able to have a store place for all of your data, and it was easy and frictionless, and then when companies were to come call to make requests for your data, you could decide, yes or no, do I want to share my data with this company for this purpose? And if so, what types of data do I want to share, right? So, but it has to be frictionless, and it has to be easy for consumers, and it has to be a set it and forget it. Otherwise, people just don't have the mental capacity. Everybody's busy with other things. People just don't have the mental capacity to go through each and every single request. And, it kind of reminds me of the privacy policies that are out there right now. I think a New York Times analysis showed that the privacy policies are so complicated and convoluted that it takes a graduate degree, not just a college degree, but a graduate degree to try to understand them. And so if it becomes complicated and complex, people aren't going to use it. So I think the digital wallet is a great idea, but it needs to be implemented in a smooth, frictionless way that people can set it and forget it.
Right. And I guess to you then, Lou, who builds this? Is it each company's responsibility? Do one of the existing platforms jump in? They have the tech, they have the lawyers. or does it do it, or will it be the next sort of Uber unicorn that does that creates this wallet?
Sure. Well, we think where the world is going is to a small handful of what we think of as data hubs, where they aggregate large amounts of data and lots of people in the ecosystem connect to them. And so, we think by focusing on the blockchain that that others can put their data and participate in the blockchain, and ultimately, we'd want to have that be decentralized. And so, so everybody would know that it's true transparency, and it's very, very difficult to hack. And if you think about it, I do agree with what Enoch said, that it's got to be drop dead simple and has to be set it and forget it. If all you're talking about is the privacy and a little bit of money. But I think when it gets to be more money, people can spend time. But I also think that there's an opportunity to gamify a lot of this. And I also think how we think of data is going to change a lot now that it can be digitized like this and sliced and diced. And so even thinking about, having your data be an NFT, right? And it can be a collectible. And now it's all, now it's already something very different. So I think we're at the very, very beginning of what I think is going to be a super exciting time for privacy and monetization of data.
I think you're dead right, and I'm mindful of the time. So, as question for sort of segueing into that sort of answers one of the questions that we had from Jonathan Schwartz, which was, tokenizing a user's data, and as Lou puts it, like gamifying it. As someone who got into privacy by mistake and then morphed into blockchain and crypto, I've been blown away by the innovation, associated with DeFi, disintermediation of, financial services and products using crypto. And what struck me very early was the potential convergence between data and DeFi. That, DeFi has, at the moment, there are about something like 2 million active users of DeFi products in the world, which is small. But that's partly because not everyone has, crypto, and a lot of the tools that you use to navigate DeFi, they're not user friendly at all. They're kind of geeky. But we all have data, and as we were saying, if you then, as Enoch was saying, if we have a very easy to use consumer grade set of tools, then that opens up all sorts of possibilities. And there are already, a number of projects exploring, data NFTs, Boson protocol, Tap My Data is also looking at it. I think the more that we can tap into those technologies and also those strategies, which have been borrowed from financial markets, sometimes even been borrowed from things like spread betting, and apply the data, the asset that we all have, our data, to it can be a way to really bring it into the mainstream. And having, a few years ago when the original crypto rush happened, I was getting some work done on my house, and like all the builders were like buying crypto at the time, and I felt I got FOMO. That's when I first realized what FOMO was. That hasn't necessarily happened yet. You've seen more a maturation of things like Bitcoin to become like a treasury instrument, but I think this gamification element could really be the thing that blasts this into the mainstream, and is also the thing that's putting some privacy professionals noses out of joint. That there is some people believe that we shouldn't be discussing monetization of data and regulation, and ethics don't mix. I disagree, and as a closer, it'd be good to see what the panel thinks about this. Do we need to keep them separate, or is that the way forward? Avi, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first here. Listen, I completely, wholeheartedly agree with you, Gilbert. I think, first of all, I think that train has already left the station. Anyone who's trying to put that, back in the bag is just going to get it, blown up in their face. And so this is the way the world is going. I think, we mentioned NFTs, we mentioned cryptocurrencies, there's actually I was going to mention an example of the most digital country in the world, the country that has the most digital services. I wonder if anyone can guess who it is. Does anyone know?
Israel?
No. Whose information, the digitization of governmental services is the most advanced?
China?
Believe it or not, Estonia. Estonia has 99% of their government services that have been digitized, and they've created information hubs, as Enoch said before, called X-Road for citizens' data. The point that I'm trying to make is that this stuff is already happening, and if we don't talk about the ethics of it and how we need to, if we don't have these conversations and we just say, no, we can't have that, and we fight against it, we're just going to find ourselves in a situation where we have no guidelines and it's just a complete Wild West. I also think that from, when you talk about, we talked about before, trust and control, the underlying tenets of privacy, any privacy framework, you can have trust and control in a way that allows people to still make money from their, from selling their data. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that, the smart organizations, governments, companies, whoever it is, are going to be having this conversation and going to be reaching a framework that works both for the organization to be able to make money and for the individuals to be able to make money, so that it's not a zero-sum game, but a positive-sum game.
Absolutely. Enoch, what's your view on this? How close do they have to get together?
Well, I think when we launched the Data Dividend Project, we took a lot of criticism from American civil rights organizations that basically were saying, hey, privacy is a fundamental human right, and you shouldn't be able to license or sell it, just like you can't license or sell your kidney, right? And I think our response to that was, look, the genie's already out of the bottle. Right now, your data is being bought, sold, resold, retargeted, and you're not seeing any share of it. So, to those people that want to take back control of their data and remain dark and not have their data sold, no problem, right? The California Consumer Privacy Act, the California Privacy Rights Act, and additional legislation is giving you that right. You could go out and opt out of all sale, all targeting, all processing your data. You could demand deletion of your data across all these platforms. That's your right, that's your prerogative. But I think that, surveys show that roughly 20 to 30% of Americans are like that. There's no amount of money that would convince them to license their data, and they have that right under U.S. laws. However, there's a huge, that leaves a huge majority of Americans, 70, 80%, who don't mind receiving targeted ads once in a while if they share in that value. And so I think that both of those positions can be reconciled, but the current situation is completely unworkable, and it can't continue.
Indeed. Well, I'm mindful of the time. Lou, I'll let you close us out as our guest.
Well, look,
host, Stephen.
I think this has been a great dialogue. Thank you very much, Avishai and Enoch, for coming in and joining us today. And I look forward to having you guys back on a future call. Gilbert, great job. Thanks everybody for showing up. And there'll be a replay posted for those people, I guess, in Canada who couldn't get through. I got multiple emails from that. But I thought it was a great call. Thanks everybody.